Defensive reinforcements were the name of the game for the Dolphins on day 2 of the league's legal tampering window. We're here to talk about them here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I am your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase on last-minute tickets. Lowest prices, guaranteed. Dolphins, not super busy relative to other teams across the league, but that's also not super surprising when you consider they are being more strategic with their spending this offseason. And, you know, to be fair, they were pretty strategic with their spending last offseason for agency as well. It's all cyclical, right? And Miami is at a point right now where they have the surplus of the big contracts, but then also the surplus of young players because of how they chose to attack 2021 and 2022 that are going to need new contracts. So your decision was to either drive the car all the way over the cliff or to recalibrate, which I think is, as people have asked me this week, you know, the state of affairs of Miami. I think recalibration is probably the best adjective to describe how they're choosing to go about their business. But the agreements that they came to yesterday with two veteran players are probably going to be really meaningful players for Miami. And they get pretty friendly market value for both of these guys. You know, Miami agreed to terms with somebody who we spotlighted 2 weeks ago when it was announced he was being cut from his current team as a post-June 1st cut. And that, of course, was Shaq Barrett from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And then Jordan Poyer, safety from the Bills, who was linked to the Dolphins a whole bunch last year. He also agreed to terms. So that's where we're at today. So we're going to talk about Shaq Barrett. We're going to talk about Jordan Poyer. And then we're going to talk about where the market's at right now and what makes sense. So Shaq Barrett, it was announced, agreed in terms to a 1-year deal worth up to $9 million. And up to is important, right? Because that's the max value of the contract. Some of these max value contracts that you're hearing, take Anthony Jennings, another edge player. He re-signed in New England on a 3-year deal. It was reported that the max value of that contract was $24 million. But the base value of the contract was half of that. So 3 for 12. 3 for 12 is very different than 3 for 24. So for Shaq Barrett, who I had in the same bucket of players as Andrew Van Ginkel when we were previewing the Edge group, along with Jonathan Grenard from the Texans, who signed in Minnesota on a 4-year, $76 million contract. Bryce Tuff, who signed 3 years, $51 with the Philadelphia Eagles. Van Ginkel signed 2 for $20 with Minnesota. Josh Uche went back to New England on a 1-year deal worth up to $8 million, but a base of $3 million. And Shaq Barrett's in that same ballpark as far as max value on a 1-year contract. So the only other player that I had in that bucket, which are all like adequate starters on the edge group, is Jadeveon Clowney. And it sounds like he's going to take a visit to the Carolina Panthers this week. So Miami getting in the same buckets of talent as an outgoing talent for a lesser commitment with probably more conditional money. When you consider the edge group that they have with Phillips, and shout out to Jalen Phillips, he's walking without a limp. That update came courtesy of social media. And obviously Bradley Chubb with his rehab from his season-ending injury last year, late in the year as well. A guy like Shaq Barrett is really attractive because you're protecting yourself from saying, well, if he ends up reaching max value on his contract, he was definitely worth it because of whatever the stipulations are within the contract. But I love the fact that Miami went out and they got a veteran player who I had coveted literally right next to Andrew Van Ginkel for half of the commitment. And when Miami's ideology, okay, and there's a whole bunch of people and all different kinds of feelings for all different kinds of reasons about Miami's ideology. They talked about sustained success They talk about long-term contender, and they talk about flexibility. And you're at that stage where you're going to start to cherry pick and choose who you want your next big contracts to be. Because I cannot state this enough. If Miami wanted to pay Christian Wilkins and Robert Hunt big time money to keep them, they could have. But the ramifications of that would have been compromising the fluidity and the flexibility of what their roster situation is, what players they're committed to, how to easily get out of those contracts, not eating up too much of your roster into voided dollars for players who in future years will no longer be under contract to be with the team. Like, all that stuff is a part of the ideology of who Miami wants to be. And they've told us that for several years. And they've shown us that for several years with how they have operated from a contracts perspective and how they structure the contracts. And how there's multiple exit strategies for big contracts that they have, whether it's pre-June 1st, post-June 1st, wait another year, restructure, all that stuff. But now that you're at that tipping point where you're going to have to start to cherry pick veteran contracts like Shaq Barrett with conditional money and veteran contracts like Jordan Poyer, it's like a bridge player, right? You don't expect it to be a long-term solution. But as the league has shown us annually, the vast majority of teams across the league are going to have 30 to 40% attrition annually on their roster where players are different. So to find plus value players, even if they're older, even if they're not quite what they were at their peak, on short-term commitments to fill in the gaps on your roster, that is a team-building strategy. And it's part of what the New England Patriots did so well in the midst of their peak. And I'm not saying that that's, what Miami is by any means, but that is teams, once you get past the initial influx and spike in talent and you reach a certain level of sustained success, and I know they haven't won a playoff game. It's not really the point. The point is they have been playoff contenders, double-digit wins, winning seasons 4 straight seasons. So there's teams that would trade a lot just to reach that floor. How do you break through to the next height while you're still riding that wave? It's contracts like these that can help you challenge to achieve that. It's not guaranteed, but challenge to achieve it. So I really like the Shaq Barrett contract because it's less than half the financial commitment for a comparable pass rusher. Shaq Barrett, Andrew Van Ginkel, from a pass rush efficiency standpoint, was one of the better edge rushers in the league. Shaq Barrett was not on that level this past year. But if you have a player who was top 30 in the league in pressures, which he was, he had 50 pressures from the edge group, all of the edge rushers last year. His pass rush efficiency was top 25. So he could still absolutely rush the passer. And you're bringing in this player with the expectation you're going to have a larger role than normal early in the season. And then as the season wears on, your role is going to diminish and allow you to stay fresher later as an older player. It's a likable formula. That's the thought process. And a lot of what I do on this show is explore the why and the thought process and what the intent is behind it. Knowing full well, it doesn't always work out that way. And that's an important disclaimer for all of this. But you can see the intent behind a contract like this. And that's what makes me like it, especially relative to the economics of a comparable player in the same bucket who's just a little older, but you get a shorter commitment out of that and more flexibility, which is the whole name of the game of how they have consistently preached of what they want to be. Okay. We're going to talk about Jordan Poyer next here on this episode of Locked on Dolphins. Make sure that you stick with us. Today's episode of Locked on Dolphins is sponsored by BetterHelp. It can be easy to ignore our social battery and spread ourselves too thin, especially with social gatherings picking up in the wintertime. What's the right amount of socializing for you? How do you recharge? Maybe you thrive around people, or maybe you like a little bit more time alone. Therapy can give you the self-awareness that you need to build a social life that doesn't drain your battery. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out the brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you could switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to save 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All Pro Poe is the nickname. Jordan Poyer. Back in Florida after what has apparently been quite a saga for him to get back here. He played college at Oregon State. He was drafted in 2013. He's going to turn 33 years old next month. So he signs a 1-year deal worth $2 million, or agrees to terms on a 1-year deal worth $2 million. Jordan Poyer does with the Dolphins. And if you told me that Jordan Poyer was going to be a selection for Miami, I probably would have been a little bit lukewarm with it, just because of, defensive backs and safeties getting up in age a little bit. I think Poyer certainly passed the peak prime of his career. A little bit more variance as a player, but this is also a player that played 987 snaps last year. You respect that, and you identify and recognize some of that after the Matt Milano injury came at a position that Poyer usually didn't play. He played the lowest amount of snaps at free safety in his entire Buffalo career. He played this past year in spite of playing almost 1,000 snaps. So as you dig into the context of Jordan Poyer and where he's at, highest amount of box snaps taken, 419 snaps in the box as a second-level defender, 313 snaps at free safety, 197 snaps in the slot. His previous high in Buffalo for snaps in the slot was 130, so 67 more snaps as a slot defender this year than any other year. The next lowest amount of free safety snaps that Jordan Poyer had taken was last year, 423, so 110 less snaps at free safety. And 419 snaps in the box. His previous high in Buffalo was back in 2018. He took 400. In 2022, he played 200 snaps in the box, so more than twice the amount of box snaps this year. So I think that is helpful for assessing Jordan Poyer, the player, is recognizing he got put in some positions where he was challenged in different ways. The ball production was down. He didn't have an interception after having 9 in each of the last 2 seasons combined. But the missed tackle rate, respectable. 7 missed tackles for Jordan Poyer while playing closer to the line of scrimmage. As not necessarily a big guy. It's the right amount of risk. For 1 year, $2 million, this is barely a scratch the surface of your salary cap type of player. And he's all amped up to come back to Florida. He said himself that coming home, right? There was a big flirtation with Jordan Poyer last year for the Dolphins. And it seemed like they had a pretty good chance to sign him. He ends up signing a deal about, was it $7 million per to go back to Buffalo on a 2-year deal. He's cut. And because he's cut, just like Shaq Barrett was cut, these signings do not implicate the Dolphins' compensatory pick formula, and they're standing in their pursuit of additional draft compensation for the losses of Robert Hunt and Christian Wilkins. Is Jordan Poyer your definitive other answer at safety? I think he can be. I think you do need to protect yourself, though, and you also want to be mindful that Baltimore has a scheme that used a lot of 3 safety stuff between Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton and Geno Stone last year, which is obviously what Anthony Weaver is bringing to Miami. If you think about the personnel that the Dolphins have, they've already alluded to in introductory press conferences that Jalen Ramsey is going to move around. I don't think that makes him Kyle Hamilton, but I think that makes him Kyle Hamilton-ish and esque with his utilization. And that gets back to Jalen Ramsey's roots with the Rams. And I think that's a good thing. I think that makes him more of a defensive weapon that we anticipated we were getting instead of an outside corner, no matter how good of an outside corner he is. I think in Javon Holland, you have a Marcus Williams type of player. I think he's a little bit more versatile than Marcus Williams. And Jordan Poyer's probably the Geno Stone type of player, where Geno Stone had some good ball production. Athleticism doesn't jump off the page at you a little bit. He's not the biggest guy, but he's productive. Obviously had huge ball production in Baltimore's defense last year, being around the football and being in the right place. I think Jordan Poyer, with his instincts, allows him to do some of those same things. You can move Jordan Poyer around, obviously evidenced by what he did last year in Buffalo with being a second-level defender. The concern is just Father Time's undefeated, right? And what is the runway for Jordan Poyer to play at a level that the Dolphins can be really excited about as their second primary safety? And then Jalen Ramsey obviously being a defensive weapon that moves around. 1 year, $2 million really protects you from that, in my mind. So that was my concern with Jordan Poyer as well. He didn't have the ball production, had to kind of play in a different spot last year. He's going to be 33. I don't love that. But then for 1 year, $2 million, this is a player that really just wanted to play here. And for that price, it's hard to see any viable risk, because you've really protected yourself financially. Again, a short-term contract with proper protections and gives you ample flexibility to transition and pivot. And then as Miami goes through the next 18 months, they're going to go through 2 draft classes in the next 18 months. I would expect there's going to be more of a centered focus in getting back into that side of the team building strategy. And as the next round of players emerge is from that gambit, you'll need less veteran players, but they'll still be cheaper contracts. So then you can reinvest elsewhere and the cycle will continue to spin. But for 2024, a player of this level of experience coming from a divisional rival, so there's a little bit of insight that could perhaps be helpful in how to attack that team. Let's not forget the impact that Ronaldo Hill may or may not have had as a coach coming over from the Chargers in the offseason. Miami obviously needs to solve this riddle if they're going to get to where they need to be, particularly this year. You look at the division and the divisional landscape, Jets have been quiet. I'm sure they'll make some splashes, but their quarterback is presumably more concerned about whether or not he's going to run for vice president on the independent ticket than he is the Jets right now. The Bills have been less active than Miami has, in all honesty. I think their moves where they re-signed Daquan Jones, which is an excellent signing for them. It's a loss to the interior defensive line market. And they have brought in Nicholas Moreau. It's wide receiver, or at safety, linebacker, excuse me. And they just signed they just agreed with Mac Hollins today to potentially replace Gabe Davis. That's probably an upgrade over Gabe Davis, but that's neither here nor there. So Miami, you look at, okay, yeah, there's been outgoing talent, but between Jordan Brooks and Jordan Poyer and Shaq Barrett and Aaron Brewer on the offensive line, Jonnu Smith, there's been some retooling and some, again, recalibrating of positions that's more active than Buffalo. And then New England is sitting out here just re-signing their own guys. Nobody wants to play for them right now. They're so far away from being on that competitive pathway that if you solve the Western New York riddle as Miami this year, even just split, like you put yourself in a position to potentially win the division and compete for home playoff games and playoff wins and all those things that everybody's all mad about that we don't have right now. It's out there. And moves like this can help if Father Time allows it. And as is the case with free agency, most players are on free agency because there is some level of inherent risk with these players. Because if there was not, they'd assign big contracts with their other team already. So that's Jordan Poyer. Now we're going to switch gears. We're going to talk about what's left on the market, what is of interest, what I hope they attack, what I hope they leave for later. That's all next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you stick with us. If you are somebody who likes live sporting events or concerts or comedy, whatever it may be, Gametime is your ticketing app to go to because they give you complete peace of mind with your purchase. They're obsessed with finding you ways to save money on your tickets. When you purchase with Gametime, you can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. And all-in prices show you your upfront total, so you know you're getting a great deal before you even check out. You buy tickets in just a few taps from your phone. And with zone deals, you can pick the section, and Gametime will pick your seats for big time savings. And if you have the Gametime guarantee in your back pocket, knowing you always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app. Create an account and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. The free agent market in some spots has been relentless. I look at running back. Henry's off the board. Aaron Jones is off the board. Josh Jacobs off the board. Saquon Barkley's off the board. Tony Pollard's off the board. DeAndre Swift's off the board. Devin Singletary's off the board. Austin Eckler's off the board. Joe Mixon gets traded. Zach Moss is off the board. Not a lot of interest there. So much so Miami agreed to terms on a one-year, $1.2 million deal for Savon Ahmed last night, which is fine. I think Savon's probably a long shot to make the roster, but you got to fill out an offseason roster regardless. You got to get to 51 players for the cap purposes. That's a $1.2 million cap hit until you get up over 51 players. And I like Savon, a special teams guy, kind of a adequate player at a lot of levels for playing the running back position, not really going to move the needle for you. I certainly think he's behind the eight ball to make the roster. The Dolphins haven't done anything with Jeff Wilson at this stage. You also have Chris Brooks there, so you're potentially looking at RB5 for Savon. That market's just about done. The wide receiver market is not a very friendly place to live right now when the likes of Gabriel Davis and Darnell Mooney are getting $13 million per year, and Kendrick Bourne's getting $11 million per year. I'm generally not interested in picking up what you're putting down. I've seen it referred to a couple places that Miami may be working towards a reunion with Braxton Berrios. I think from a special teams perspective, you could do worse than that. You could do much worse than that. Whatever Miami's return situation was in 2022 comes to mind. But you certainly want an upgrade for your third wide receiver. You don't want to come into 2024 with that being the case. Tight end is done. Miami's probably done in that market anyway. So much of like Gesicki signed with Cincinnati or agreed to terms with Cincinnati, but the top names were Fant, Schultz, Henry. They're off the board. Disley goes to the Chargers. Colby Parkinson goes to the Rams. Austin Hooper's off the board. You're looking at Gerald Everett's off the board. Irv Smith's off the board. It's like Harrison Bryant is probably the best available tight end currently still out there, based off of at least what I've seen. Maybe he signed somewhere too. The tackle market hasn't really moved at all. You have a lot of veteran tackles that are still out there. Maybe you're in this staring contest, trying to pick up some added value for free agent offers. Kendall Lampson being out there is certainly still a name that comes to mind for Miami. If you lost out on Kendall Lamb, George Fant is potentially a player who's had to start in a couple different spots. Is not necessarily an ideal preferred starter going into seasons between the Jets and the Texans the last couple years. I could have a market there for him. He played this past year on a one-year, $3 million deal. So that's or projected for a one-year, $3 million deal. That's kind of where my eyes go as a backup plan to Kendall Lamb. But again, you're going to need an adequate third tackle, and they have not done that yet. So I have eyes there. The interior offensive line market, just brutal. Everybody's off the board. Like Kevin Zeitler and Connor Williams are the two most notable names that are probably still out there. Cody Whitehair is a June 1st or a cut from earlier in the spring is still out there. As is Laken Tomlinson as a cut and Brian Allen as a cut. So you have a number of different players who would not impact your compensatory formula that at least have playing experience. If you grabbed one, I wouldn't be mad about it, but I also wouldn't feel like you really solved upgrading either any of your spots that you need. And you probably need both guard spots you want to get addressed. So that's on my wish list. Nothing's on my wish list more than interior defensive line, even though it's kind of becoming a bit of a bloodbath as well as far as what's available out there. It's really Zach Sealer right now. Wilkins obviously goes to the Raiders. Chris Jones back to Kansas City on a monster contract. Weeks off the board. Leonard Williams is off the board. He went back to Seattle. Daquan Jones, the Buffalo. Danico Autry to Houston. Justin Jones to the Cardinals. Grover Stewart goes back to the Colts. Fletcher Cox retires. Shelby Harris back to the Browns. Fali Fatukasi gone. Raekwon Davis signs a 2-year, $14 million contract with the Colts, to which I say la vie, best elected with that. Indy, I don't know where you're going to play him, but Grover Stewart's already your nose tackle. You know, play him in the B gap. Okay. Kinlaw's off the board on a 1-year, $9 million contract with the Jets. Names that are still out there. Eric Armstead is a cut from the 49ers. The question and the trick for Miami would be making the dollars work there. And I don't know how easy that's going to be based on if you're in the stratosphere of Leonard Williams and DJ Reader and Matabweek, and Matabweek gets 19 per and or 4 years, 96. So he gets 24 per, excuse me. I'm not a math guy. That's what we try to put out there. Leonard Williams gets 21.5 per. If Armstead's in that stratosphere, you kind of expect he's going to land in the same dollars. So then you're on to, okay, Jonathan Hankins, is that a meaningful player, even though he's going to be a low snap guy? Lawrence Guy, potentially from New England, is out there as a cut. Miami, because of the Raekwon Davis signing, though, does have a compensatory free agent qualifying player to play with, to sign, that would not impact either Robert Hunt or Christian Wilkins' compensatory picks for 2025. So that's nice to know that you have in your back pocket. Sheldon Rankins, maybe from Houston, the penetration type player might make some sense. But again, it's your dollars have to get aligned. And I don't know that Miami's going to have a lot of grace there until we know what the situation was with Teron Armstead's contract, and then if they decide to restructure either Tyreek Hill or Bradley Chubb. The edge group, I think with Shaq Barrett, you probably leave that well enough alone for now, unless it's a 1-year, $2 million type player or like a low investment player. I think linebacker's probably done when you consider David Long, Jordan Brooks, Anthony Walker, Duke Riley currently, and then Channing Tindall. You got 5 backers on the roster right now that you feel like have a viable argument to make the 53. So I'd leave that well enough alone. Corner, I think you have a need for, and I still think you have a need at safety. Corner is just kind of an awkward market as far as where the talent is available. Hasn't really moved as far as Stephon Gilmore and Xavier Howard are still out there. Steven Nelson and Kendall Fuller are still out there. Awuzie came off the board to the Titans. Dante Jackson gets traded from the Panthers to the Steelers. Sean Wilfred Bunting goes to Arizona. So you have some need for movement, I think, at the top of the market before you get into a lot of the guys that are going to have appetites to sign shorter term, smaller deals. And then safety, Xavier McKinney signs a big contract. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson came off the board yesterday, 3 for 33 to Philadelphia. You got a lot of names available here, whether it's Deshaun Elliott or otherwise. I would love to see them end up finding an agreement for somebody as a third safety just for maximum flexibility in that room, feeling like you're not boxed into a corner. So there's some heavy work to do on the interior of the lines on both sides of the line of scrimmage, but I think you're kind of into ancillary players for most of the other spots, be it safety, corner, edge, offensive tackle, wide receiver. Like those are mostly ancillary. You have your foundational players, and it's how do you attack the rest of the process to find the best players to sprinkle in amongst that. So you're kind of narrowing in your scope a little bit, which is a good place to be, but means there's more work to be done. We'll see what else comes down the pipe. I'm Kyle Krabs. You can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. I appreciate you guys checking out the show. Keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. I'll talk to y'all again soon. You can find me on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.